Should free speech have limits? And if so, what should they be? And if not, are we prepared for the consequences? These are the questions that the MTA had to grapple with in a recent decision to ban all political ads from NYC subways and buses. The policy was prompted by a Manhattan judge's decision that allowed a series of political ads to run on MTA billboards that were attacking the Islamic faith. Now today I'm joined by two members of the MTA board, both of whom cast votes on the ban, one for and one against, as well as a staff attorney with the New York Civil Liberties Union. We'll try to break down the First Amendment rights at issue and explore the legal challenges faced by both sides of the debate. Now, I want to welcome the two MTA board members. Both of them are lawyers. First, let's welcome Charles Myrtler. Thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate this. And I also want to say welcome to Jonathan Ballin. Thank you also. We have with us Marika Hirose, who's a staff attorney with the New York Civil Liberties Union. And just to get right in, and before I get into the specifics about the ban itself, was the judge in Manhattan, Judge Cotto, correct in his reasoning? I mean, can you have an ad that indicts a religion and then say it's not hate speech? I want to start with you, Marika.
I do think the judge's opinion was right. The argument that the MTA made in that case was that ad would incite violence or would constitute fighting words. But the judge found that there was no evidence that that's the case. And the same ad had run in other cities
Chicago as well,
across the United States. And, you know, we're here in New York. We have a lot of free speech and diversity of views. And I think New Yorkers would have been able to deal with the ad, even though it was very hateful.
Yeah, and Charles, what's your...
The judge's decision was based on a set of facts that now have changed by reason of what the MTA did last week. And I can go through that. I just want to make the point that there was no evidence of that is wrong, because within a week afterward we had Garland, Texas. The same people who ran that ad ran that vicious anti-Muslim charade in Texas, where two people were killed.
About what happened in Texas, where they had a cartoon drawing contest for the Prophet Muhammad. So that in and of itself would have incited violence, not so much an ad which talks about how, with regard to members of the Muslim faith, that this is their jihad. So that was a little different.
It's different. The concept is really the following. And let me bifurcate it, if I may. What the MTA did last week was very simple. The MTA's buses, trains, and the like are deemed to be, incorrectly so, a public forum. The question is, and in a public forum, there is an obligation. If you take one set of ads, you've got to take them all. You cannot place censor, and that's as it should be. The question then is, do we want to continue to be a public forum? Do we want to encourage these kind of hateful ads? Hateful speech is not harmless speech. Understand that. What we have done now is to say that no more viewpoint ads, not just political ads, no more viewpoint. Our space is to be used for commercial advertising to raise money. And so we have attempted to change the nature of what we are and turn it into a limited public forum, in which we would not take any non-commercial ads other than public service and focus solely on the commercial ads that bring in the basic revenue. But with respect to the basic issue of free speech, let me be very clear about it. There are limits on free speech. Oliver Wendell Holmes put it aptly: you cannot cry fire in a crowded theater.
Fire in a crowded theater, right?
You cannot use hateful words without engendering hate. And if we ever needed an illustration, you saw it in Garland, Texas. And you will see it again and again. There are some people who you just can't constrain. That's a moral compass decision. It's not a constitutional decision. The constitutional decision, in my view, is what is it that you are going to do? If you are going to be an unlimited public forum, then you have an obligation. If you're going to be a limited public forum, you have a different obligation. And if you're going to be a closed forum, for example, if I wanted to put up ads or stand on the courthouse steps in the United States District Court where the judge was sitting, and I had a big sign up that had some pejorative concerning a race, creed, or religion, you'd have 5 million marshals on you in about 3.5 seconds.
That's an interesting point, but yes, by all means.
I just think I just want to go backward. I think the judge's decision, once again, different judge, same issue as the MTA struggles with its
They had this issue in 2012. This issue has come up
coming
many
back
times.
and back, and then the MTA in its paternalistic role keeps trying to quell free speech and keeps getting told by the courts, no. So I thought it was a well-reasoned opinion, and my good friend Chuck lays out, perhaps maybe a little prematurely in this conversation, the indicia and the way the courts analyze this. The court determines there are 3 types of forums that government property could be. And depending on the forum, there's a different scrutiny of the constitutional analysis.
So what's the difference between a subway and a bus, whether it's inside or the outside, where these advertisements be placed, and the courthouse steps, as Charles just mentioned?
Well, what I think, well, first of all, I want to address one point also that he said, and that is the notion of fighting words has been construed by the Supreme Court to have very limited applicability in terms of how often it is cited to quell free speech, to prevent free speech. And there were no cases cited in the last 2 pieces of litigation, just the standard that the proponents, the MTA, offered, that they were fighting words and that they would therefore lead to violence. But there was no example of that. The ads ran in other cities. And I'm in an awkward position of defending these ads, which I really didn't start out wanting to do, but I am trying to defend the notion of free speech and what the government's limits in stopping to prevent free speech should be. There is a very different factual situation in the horrible situation and incident in Texas from what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And you know, I for one think that if you want to get into the discussion of forum, I think it might be the case where different MTA properties have different designations depending on what their factual situations are. And I'm surprised that hasn't come up before. But maybe it hasn't come up before because we keep losing the cases.
Let me just make one point.
Yeah, really quickly.
The United States Supreme Court, in a decision that has never, ever been questioned, called Lehman against Shaker Heights, specifically held that where the municipality decides to take off all political ads and retain only commercial ads, that is properly within the confines. Let me tell you where my concern in all this. John, as usual, is entirely correct in his analysis in terms of where this is going. My concern is the following. One, I think we've now dealt with the issue in terms of fitting within a Supreme Court constitutional compass. But there's another issue. This is less of a civil society today than it was yesterday, and it will be even less tomorrow, the way we deal with one another in a city and outside the cities as well. When you go around, as the same people who put that ad in caused the Texas event, all right? When you go around using hateful speech, whether it be against gays, whether it be against Latinos as in Suffolk County, whether it be against African Americans, or whether it be against Muslims, what you do by doing that is you deliberately incite. Indeed, the comment by the person who's most behind all of this stuff was, we have reached a stage where it's not appropriate to offend Muslims. Well, I think we have reached a stage where it is appropriate to not offend Muslims, not offend Jews, not offend African Americans, and try and act civilly. Now, that's the moral compass side of it. The legal side of it, I believe, is that 3-part which John has correctly analyzed, and I think we've walked into the middle part to stop this stuff, because how would you like to sit on a subway train for an hour looking at this stuff, or walking down the street and on the front of the bus? And this latest round, which never got public attention, I might add, was not just on the subject of Muslims, it was the naming of individuals associated with large, nationally acclaimed Jewish organizations and linking them to Kristallnacht, the killing which ultimately led to the genocide of World War II.
Before we get into the ads themselves, I really want to talk about the ban, and I want to bring Mariko into this as well. So the ban itself states that now there can be no ads, political ads that contain an opinion, and I'm quoting here, regarding a disputed economic, political, moral, religious, or social issue, as well as no bans that are political in nature. Now that wording, to me, as a lawyer reading that sounds very vague. I mean, what is a disputed social, political, moral, religious issue? How do you determine what that is?
Yeah, I agree. I think you've gotten right to the point. That language is very broad and vague. I mean, what is not disputed in our society today? And I just want to address, I understand the instinct to want to protect people from hateful speech, but that contravenes the Constitution's free speech principles, which are there to protect debate. And there's a whole line of cases that had found New York City subways and buses advertising space to be a forum that is appropriate for that kind of debate. And I think it is a great loss for society when we shut down a huge swath of speech in order to try to deal with something that people find to be hateful.
And how does commercial speech fit into this particular ban?
Allowed.
So, but because there are some commercial speeches, for example, the Manhattan storage ads. Those ads are very socially relevant. They're very liberal leaning. One could argue that contains a disputed issue with regard to politics, for example.
I think the
Would that be not
politics of
allowed?
it is as follows. I think the legality of it is as follows. If it is commercial speech and can be fairly construed by any standard that is reasonable as commercial in origin, selling something, then it is under this ban permitted.
Even though the messaging within that commercial advertising may be a disputed political, economic, social, religious issue.
We can both argue how many angels dance on the head of a pin. But the issue really is it something that the reasonable man can conclude was, or woman, can conclude was commercial? Illustrate the point. Potter Stewart once said aptly, if it quacks like a duck and it looks like a duck, it's a duck. And if it's commercial, it's commercial.
But you have to read the whole policy. First of all, we're out of the blue redesignated what for decades the forum that we've been. So the courts are going to eventually, I assume this will be challenged, they're eventually going to decide what type of forum it is, which is maybe a little boring, but that's the technical side of it.
I think it's interesting because you guys set up two separate examples of that: public steps of the courthouse versus sitting on a subway for an hour with the ad in your face.
Just think about it. If any government could say, no, that's not this forum, that's not that forum, then you've stopped all free speech. So the characteristics are going to come into play, not just what we as the governing board of MTA says it is. So what is in this city where over 6 million people a day are taking us or more on some days? What has the transit system become? Is it the same as a sidewalk? What is it? That'll be one thing that's discussed. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But the issue I wanted to say, one last point is, we're allowing not-for-profit speech. So in our paternalistic role, we're now saying what's good and what isn't. We're allowing speech for the art. Where would an advertisement that I could imagine you could really have some creativity with for that Klinghoffer opera come in? Where would the notion of hamburgers perhaps being, or triple cheeseburgers with extra cheese being healthy for you, where would that come in? Are we now going to tell everyone what is acceptable by our standards or not? And the government should not be in that role. Free speech is going to be messy. It's going to lead to debate. If you don't like it, turn your head. It's really not that hard to ignore the ads.
If you will. If you were to stand on the streets of New York City, or if you were to put an offer of an advertisement to the New York Post, the New York Times, or any other institution that used the N-word or that used an attack on Latinos or gays or Jews or what have you, that would be sensed by the civilized society as being most inappropriate. Our function is to transport people safely and serenely, to the extent you can do it serenely, from point A to point B, fast, efficient, and cost effective. I'm not so sure about the last point. As fast as you could do it, all right? It's not to provide the platform. There are loads of places in New York, just across the street from the courthouse, if you will, where you can do it. What the New York Civil Liberties Union and the ACLU pointed out decades ago in Skokie was that you can walk down a street and proclaim your adherence to the Nazi principles, and that's protected speech. And I agree. But you can't do it by an ad in the New York Times because they won't accept it. You can't do it in the New York Post because they won't accept it. Why do the public who ride the subways have to take that crap?
And I'm going to have to
we're the
leave it
government
there.
And we have the First Amendment applicable to us.
And there we go. Thank you guys very much for the spirited debate. It's one that will continue going because I know, are you guys challenging this ban with the NYCLU?
We're not currently challenging the ban, but I understand there's a case still pending.
A few cases pending, so we'll see where it goes, and I hope to bring you all back to talk about it as it continues through the legal process. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.